I'm Mr. Beat.
Quote, if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything.
That's a famous quote. A quote from a dude remembered for his quotes. Don't quote me on that.
Quote, a man who carries a cat by the tail learns something he can learn in no other way.
That's another famous quote from the same dude I just mentioned. A dude remembered for his quotes.
That dude was Samuel Clemens, better known to the world as Mark Twain. Quote, clothes make the man. Naked people have little or no influence in society. Yet another actual quote from Twain, one of his hundreds of sayings we are still quoting today, 116 years after his death. Quote, don't go around saying the world owes you a living. The world owes you nothing. It was here first.
Okay, that quote is often attributed to Mark Twain, but there's no evidence he actually said that.
Quote, the secret of getting ahead is getting started.
Yeah, according to the Mark Twain Project at UC Berkeley, that's the single most cited fake Mark Twain quote going around on the internet. It has absolutely no connection to anything Mark Twain ever wrote or said. I bring this all up to illustrate how good Mark Twain was with his words.
So witty, so insightful, so profound,
that even if he didn't say it, we often say he said it.
Quote, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. No, there's no evidence he said that either.
In this video, let's look at the American who often gets quoted the most and misquoted the most.
He was, perhaps, the greatest storyteller in American history. He basically defined American literature. While most American writers tended to mimic European authors, Twain was like, nope, I'm gonna do my own thing. Sure, Twain gave us classic stories like Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, but he wasn't just famous for his books, he was famous for being Mark Twain, the personality, the comedian, the social critic.
And that way you could say that Twain was one of the first modern celebrities.
As the author Ron Chernow points out, Twain actively built his fame in a way that feels very modern, carefully crafting his public image with his white suit, bushy mustache, and trademark wit. He toured the world, giving lectures, but in many ways, these lectures felt like stand-up comedy. And to look at Mark Twain, we have made the journey to Twain's hometown, Hannibal, Missouri. A town that peaked in population 100 years ago and today continues to march on, mostly because of Twain. Indeed, tourism is a big part of Hannibal's economy, as not only did young Samuel Clemens grow up here, two of his most famous books, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, are set here.
Yeah, that's the Mississippi River behind me, which is basically a main character in those books. Cute, isn't it?
Here's the story of Samuel Clemens. Or Mark Twain. Same dude. You knew who I was talking about, okay?
Samuel Langhorne Clemens was born on November 30th, 1835 in Florida, Missouri. A tiny village named Florida in the state of Missouri.
He came into the world 2 months premature, so frail that his parents weren't sure he'd make it. He was also born under Halley's Comet. And here's the thing, later on, he predicted correctly that he would die when that comet returned.
That's either one of the greatest coincidences in history, or he could literally predict the future.
Sam was the 6th of 7 children. His mother, Jane, would be a huge influence on young Sam. From her, he later got his sense of humor and storytelling abilities. Sam's dad, John, was a lawyer and often struggling merchant. Jane was a conservative and very religious. John was not religious at all and even identified as agnostic.
Hey! Trying to record up here. Thank you. When Sam was about 4 years old, his family moved here to Hannibal, Missouri, on the banks of the Mississippi River. And this place, this river, it would define everything Samuel Clemens would become.
This is the house, the actual boyhood home. We were up in there. In the 1840s, Hannibal was a quickly growing and somewhat rough town. Sam and his friends played along the river and watched steamboats roll in and explode this quiet little place into noise and chaos.
And they explored caves, like this cave, Mark Twain Cave, which used to be called McDowell's Cave. They wouldn't name it after him when he was a kid.
In 2019, Dr. Cindy Lovell got worldwide attention after discovering the boyhood signature of Samuel Clemens.
Finally, at the age of 40, I've made my way to Hannibal. And like anybody going to Hannibal for the first time, you've read the books, you're curious, you say, oh, there's Cardiff Hill, there's Jackson's Island, you see all this, you get excited. Well, you can't wait to go to the cave. And I remember immediately seeing all these signatures, and I was on the tour with other tourists, and I asked, where's his signature? And they said, oh, well, we're still looking for it. Nobody's ever found it. It's in here somewhere. Over the years, as I would return, I just started looking. Every time I went in the cave, I looked. Ultimately, I moved to Hannibal in 2007 and became friends with the owner of the cave. They were so gracious and let me go in anytime I wanted. So it went on for years, and all of my friends, would kind of kid with me, but it became a thing where we just went in and looked. I wasn't expecting it. I mean, you think you see something. It's never Clemens. It's something else. But that day, that night, it was Clemens, and not just Clemens. It was Sam's signature. Now, I know his handwriting. We were speechless and sort of in shock.
And this is it. This is a young Mark Twain. She told me she was looking for it for decades.
Yes, sir.
But Hannibal also had a shady side that young Sam Clemens could not ignore.
Missouri was a slave state. In fact, Sam's father owned an enslaved person. His uncle owned several, and Sam spent summers on that uncle's farm playing in the enslaved quarters, listening to stories and spirituals. These early encounters likely planted seeds of guilt and moral questioning that would eventually bloom into some of the most searing anti-slavery writing in American literature. But we'll get there.
When Sam was 11, his father died, leaving the family with a lot of debt and Sam with almost no formal schooling.
So he did what any resourceful kid would do. He became a printer's apprentice. He learned to love words by setting them into type. And fortunately, he was a good reader by then and read anything he could get his hands on. Sam worked for the Hannibal Journal, a newspaper that his older brother, Orion, owned. Orion would later get into politics, by the way. Reading about a bunch of faraway places, I'd say, influenced Sam's desire to travel. In May 1853, when he was 17, he traveled to St. Louis and then later Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York City, working various typesetting jobs and joining the International Typographical Union, a printers' trade union. After living a rather sheltered life, the big cities shocked Sam, and this is where we see his extreme racism and prejudice. Quote, mulattoes, quadroons, Chinese, and some the Lord no doubt originally intended to be white, but the first on whose faces leaves one uncertain as to that fact. Lock up the little narrow street, and to wade through this mass of human vermin would raise the ire of the most patient person that ever lived, he wrote.
But the real dream was being back out on the river.
In 1857, when Clemens was 20 years old, he began training as a riverboat pilot under a captain named Horace Bigsby.
And this wasn't just a job, this was everything.
Riverboat pilots were the rock stars of the Mississippi River. Not only did they make good money, but they were pretty well respected. They had to memorize hundreds of miles of shifting, dangerous water.
Clemens earned his pilot's license in 1859, and for a brief, glorious stretch, he was living the dream, man. Then the American Civil War started and pretty much shut everything down. Boats were getting shot at. Classic.
Clemens briefly joined a pro-Confederate militia, but after 2 weeks he basically said, "The heck with this crap," and deserted. Quote, "Why is it we rejoice at a birth and grieve at a funeral? It is because we're not the person involved." Yeah, that's another great quote by him. Clemens didn't want to be involved in that bloody war, and so he hopped a stagecoach and headed out west. Hey, you want to know one way to fight back against misinformation? By critically thinking. And I've got a book that inspires us to do just that. The book, man. Quite literally, the book. The ultimate guide to rebuilding civilization. Yeah, let's check it out. Starting with making a fire, which is pretty handy. I love the graphics in this. Edible and inedible plants. I feel like I just want to become a survivalist now. So, as you can see, it's visually stunning, high paper quality and binding, meant to last a millennia, not a decade. Each book contains a secret puzzle for readers to discover, adding an extra layer of intrigue and interactivity. It's captivating for both your technical and humanities-minded friends. Friends? Yeah, friends. Not those friends, your real life friends. This would make the perfect gift for your smart friend or yourself, since, you know, you're pretty smart too. Childbirth, are you kidding me? Seriously, one of the coolest books I've ever seen. Check the link in the description of this video to buy yourself a copy. Use code MrBeat10 and you can get 10% off your order. Thanks to Hungry Minds, the creative team of artists, scientists, designers, architects, and entrepreneurs behind this book for sponsoring this video. He didn't head out west without knowing anyone. You see, Abraham Lincoln himself had nominated Orion to Secretary of the Nevada Territory, and Sam decided to tag along with him. The two brothers traveled on a stagecoach across the Great Plains, crossing through the Rocky Mountains. They even visited the Mormon community in Utah. Sam's journey ended in Virginia City, Nevada, where he tried silver mining.
Yeah, by all accounts, he was terrible at it. Couldn't mine crap.
So he did the only sensible thing. He became a newspaper reporter for the Virginia City Territorial Enterprise, and it was there on February 3rd, 1863 that Samuel Clemens first used the pen name Mark Twain. Mark Twain was actually a riverboat term. It meant the water was 2 fathoms deep, or about 12 feet, or 3.7 meters, or the safe depth for riverboats. Clemens had used several pseudonyms during his writing career, but Twain would stick with him for the rest of his life.
And so, henceforth, I shall refer to him as Mark Twain.
In Nevada, Twain developed a relatable, satirical voice that perfectly matched the rough and tumble frontier. In 1864, Twain moved to San Francisco, where he continued to be a journalist. He was writing hoaxes, satire, tall tales, and starting to get a national reputation for all of it.
And then, in 1865, he published a short story that changed everything. What was that short story's name again? Seriously, I forgot.
Ah, yes, the celebrated jumping frog of Calaveras County. It was a viral sensation, and just like that, Mark Twain was famous, and his popularity began to grow.
Twain spent the next few years traveling all over the world.
In 1866, he traveled to modern-day Hawaii as a reporter for the Sacramento Union. The next year, he traveled to the Mediterranean Sea to tour both Europe and the Middle East. What resulted was The Innocents Abroad, a guidebook that became one of the best-selling travel books in American history. In The Innocents Abroad, the main character wasn't the places, but Twain himself. Americans could easily relate to the book because Twain wrote as a true representative of the United States traveling around the world. Twain's genius was taking Americans abroad and showing them how ridiculous everyone was, including, especially, Americans.
Twain wasn't just a funny man.
Through his writings, he was crafting a persona with meticulous, almost obsessive care. Anyway, The Innocents Abroad made Twain rich and famous. After returning to the United States, Twain got honorary membership in Yale University's secret society, Scroll and Key.
Meanwhile, Twain had fallen in love.
On that Mediterranean cruise I just mentioned, Twain saw a portrait of a young woman and later said it was, quote, love at first sight. As it turns out, the woman was Olivia Langdon, the sister of a dude named Charles Langdon, whom Mark had befriended on the trip. Back home, Twain asked Olivia to attend a reading by Charles Dickens in New York City. Whoa! What a first date! And after a long, somewhat awkward courtship that Livy's family was very skeptical about, they would get married in Elmira, New York, Olivia's hometown, on February 2nd, 1870. Livy, as Olivia was nicknamed, ended up being Twain's editor. She read every manuscript. She pushed back, often being quite critical of him, and her family's deep abolitionist roots helped shape and sharpen his moral thinking on race in America. In other words, she helped Twain not be so freaking racist. Livy's dad, Jervis, bought them a mansion in Buffalo, New York.
Hey, will someone buy me a mansion? Please?
Jervis also gave Twain part ownership in a newspaper. This gave him tremendous financial stability, and he now focused on starting a family. Together, Livy and Mark would have 4 children: Langdon, Olivia, Clara, and Jean. Langdon was born prematurely and would die as a toddler. Livy and Mark then moved to Hartford, Connecticut, where they rented a big house and quickly became embedded in the thriving literary scene there.
And it was there that Twain threw himself into his most productive era.
In Hartford, Twain would write every day. Once the sales money of The Innocents Abroad began to dry up, Twain realized he'd have to do other things to support his growing family. Using his celebrity status to generate hype, he went on a lecture tour. 76 performances in 15 states from Maine to Illinois. He also began regularly traveling to England. Around this time, Twain co-authored a satirical novel called The Gilded Age, a tale of today, which criticized the greed and political corruption in American society of the time. The novel would give the era its nickname. We now call the period of American history between the 1870s and around 1900 the Gilded Age. In 1874, Twain and his family moved into this epic house, built in the American Gothic Revival style. Today, it's a museum dedicated to Twain. One biographer described the house as, quote, part steamboat, part medieval fortress, and part cuckoo clock. Twain spent a lot of time in this room writing and smoking cigars. It was here that Twain apparently wrote his best stuff.
His first masterpiece? His first solo attempt at a novel.
That would end up being the aforementioned The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Supposedly, he wrote it on a typewriter, which was not a common thing to do at the time. Set in the 1830s to 1840s in a small town very similar to Hannibal.
The novel is about the adventures of Tom Sawyer. Yeah, you'll just have to read it if you want to find out more than that. What do you think this is? I'm not going to describe the book to you. What do you think? I'm going to tell you the story here in this video? It's a good book. Holds up surprisingly well. Read it.
First officially published on June 9th, 1876, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer originally was a commercial failure. Eventually, though, it would end up being Twain's best-selling book and considered a masterpiece. But it wasn't just The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. When he was in his 40s, Twain wrote multiple successful and influential books. The Prince and the Pauper, Twain's first attempt at historical fiction, published in 1881. Life on the Mississippi, a memoir/travel book, published in 1883. And then his greatest masterpiece, the aforementioned Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, published in 1884. Considered one of the most influential books of all time, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is actually a sequel to The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. But this is one of those rare examples of the sequel outshining the original. Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was the first mainstream American book to feature informal English. It is a story about a boy and a runaway enslaved man named Jim floating down the Mississippi River on a raft. It is also one of the most courageous moral arguments ever made in American fiction. That Jim is a full human being, that the society trying to return him to bondage is the thing that is monstrous, not him. And Twain puts this in the mouth of a barely educated white kid from Missouri who slowly, painfully chooses his own conscience over what his whole world has told him is right. Adventures of Huckleberry Finn may have turned Twain into the father of American literature, but it also was quite a controversial book due to being quite offensive to a lot of people. I mean, Twain uses the N-word throughout the book.
Still, this book, almost single-handedly, is why we still talk about Twain today. Okay?
Even after Huckleberry Finn, Twain continued to write classics like A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, Pudd'nhead Wilson, and Personal Recollections of Joan of Arc.
But here's where things go sideways, because as a storyteller, Twain was brilliant. As a businessman, not so much at all.
Sure, Twain made a lot of money through his writing, but he also lost a bunch of money through his investments. Always fascinated by scientific development and technology, he invested the equivalent of more than $10 million in today's money on a mechanical typesetting machine invented by a guy named James Page, the Page Compositor. Sure, it was a marvel of engineering.
18,000 individual parts? 18,000 individual parts.
But it almost never worked. Aww. Twain also started his own publishing house, Charles L. Webster and Company, which did publish Ulysses S. Grant's memoirs.
A genuine sensation and a genuine bestseller. For real.
But then followed it up with a string of spectacular failures. Fewer than 200 copies sold of a biography of Pope Leo XIII. What was he thinking? No one gives a crap about Pope Leo XIII. Anyway, in 1894, it all collapsed. Twain declared bankruptcy. He owed the equivalent of millions. In today's dollars, he was humiliated, depressed, and practically broke. But instead of using legal loopholes to hide from his debts, Twain, now approaching his 60s, did something remarkable. Guided by his close friend and Standard Oil executive, Henry Huddleston Rogers, Twain went on a grueling worldwide speaking tour to pay back every single creditor, dollar for dollar. He lectured his way through North America, Australia, India, South Africa, and Europe, and indeed paid back every single creditor in full. It was quite a comeback. The tour led to another travel guidebook, Following the Equator, published in 1897.
Though he successfully paid back his debts and restored his honor, Twain's later years were pretty sad. Filled with tragedy, man.
While he was away on tour, his brilliant and beloved 24-year-old daughter, Susie, who had started writing a biography of her dad at 13 years old, died of spinal meningitis. After this, Twain had to move his family out of their beloved home in Hartford and moved to Europe, where the cost of living was much lower.
The Hartford years really were the happiest in his life. He had this safety, he had this lovely family, and just this devotion. It was very hard to travel. And when I think of the blows he endured, being separated from them, losing them so young, it was unnatural, it was hard. Somehow he went on, but the family was everything to him.
They spent much of the next few years constantly on the move as they searched for doctors who could help Livy's deteriorating health. They lived in England, France, Italy, Switzerland, Austria, and Germany, finally returning to the United States, specifically New York, in 1900. By that time, Twain had spoken out a lot more about politics.
Why the heck would he want to destroy his career like that? talking about politics. Could you imagine being a celebrity and then sharing your political opinions? That's extremely ill-advised, okay?
I just think he took a pounding out of life. You know, he withstood one tragedy after another, and I think basically the tone changed, but the principles never changed. I mean, he was darker, but he became much more philosophical. He became more pointed. I think his humor was sharper.
Twain had become the country's most famous person against imperialism, constantly criticizing American foreign policy in places like Cuba and the Philippines. He became the vice president of the Anti-Imperialist League, fiercely writing essays against American occupation abroad. He drew a sharp line between loving your country and blindly following its leaders, noting, quote, "Loyalty to country always, loyalty to government when it deserves it." Twain stayed busy in constant demand to give speeches. But then, more tragedy. Livy's health continued to decline. The family moved to Florence, Italy, hoping the climate there would help. It did not, and Livy died on June 5th, 1904. The family moved back to New York after her death. Despite these very tragic times, and despite him now being an old man, Twain was as popular now as he'd ever been. He continued to regularly speak in public and had a pretty big cultural and political influence. He had certainly changed with the times. Despite once being a conservative and even a reactionary, he had evolved into one of the nation's leading progressive thinkers. At a copyright hearing at the Library of Congress on December 7th, 1906, Twain appeared wearing a white suit, the first of many appearances in a white suit. For the rest of his life, it'd be a big part of his image. But the white suit, the banquet speeches, the wit, meh, it was all increasingly just a mask. Behind it was grief, cynicism, and a darkening view of humanity itself. He wrote pieces in those last years that he refused to publish because he thought the world wasn't ready. Pieces about the cruelty of God, the stupidity of man, the machinery of oppression. Making good money once again, in 1908, Twain moved from New York to Reading, Connecticut, to this mansion.
And then, even more tragedy.
On May 20th, 1909, his good friend Henry Rogers suddenly died. Later that year, on Christmas Eve of all freaking days, his daughter Jean died of a seizure in Twain's bathtub.
He outlived 3 of his 4 children and his wife. That's pretty sad.
The humorist who made the entire world laugh became deeply cynical, pessimistic, and angry. He predicted his own death. On April 21st, 1910, sure enough, as Halley's Comet blazed back across the sky, Samuel Langhorne Clemens, aka Mark Twain, died of a heart attack at his home in Reading. He was 74 years old. Twain's last work was his Autobiography. It wasn't published until 2010, 100 years after his death, as Twain had wished.
I've been a Twainiac since I was 10 years old. And my 4th grade teacher, God bless him, Mr. Ronald E. Reese, he would read a chapter from a book pretty much every day.
Yeah, the ones in history who are just as fresh 100, 200 years later with their words, that impresses me a lot. For people to be so far ahead of their time where you as a young person yourself, you're reading his works even though they had been old by that point.
His criticism is really durable because he's appealing to conscience, not ideology. And conscience is just who we are. We all have one. Ideologies come and go. He understood people. It's just like how he would get to us. He knew that nobody wanted to be lectured. We say how Mark Twain went on the lecture circuit. He didn't go out there and lecture. That was not what he ever did. He would go out there and disarm people. He would take away our defenses by, making us laugh and then boom, hitting us. Look at Huck Finn. Huck Finn never once gave an abolitionist speech, never got up there and said, this is what's right. Never. It was just these actions, this conversation, these real people living in these dilemmas and wrestling with their conscience all the time.
Mark Twain showed us the best and worst of America through humor and honesty.
He wasn't just a great writer. He was the first great American celebrity. He understood that a persona was itself an art form. He understood that the funniest things and the most tragic things are often the exact same things, just viewed from a different angle. I'd argue that today's comedians owe a lot to Twain. He certainly paved the way for them. Twain had been born a sickly, premature baby in a tiny Missouri village. He'd been a printer's devil, a wanderer, a riverboat pilot, a soldier for 2 weeks, a failed miner, a reporter, a lecturer, a novelist, a publisher, a bankrupt, a world traveler, and the most famous writer in America. He invented a pen name and then basically became it. Twain understood the American psyche better than almost anyone else before or since. He knew our virtues, but he was never afraid to point out our vices.
Mark Twain will live forever. I think we all owe a debt to Mark Twain, but most importantly, if you don't do anything else, just go read Mark Twain and just let it wash over you, see what you come away with. I think anybody who reads Twain comes away with something tangible.
And it all started right here. This river, this town. Just a kid watching the steamboats roll in. I'll leave you with just one more classic Twain quote that we should all remember before leaving a comment underneath the video.
Quote, "It is better to keep your mouth closed and let people think you are a fool than to open it and remove all doubt."
And so, on that note, I'm going to follow his advice and stop talking.
Can you follow his advice more often?
But actually scratch that. I actually need your comments desperately because it sends a signal to the algorithms that this is a video actually worth watching. Please type your favorite Mark Twain quote in the comments below.
There might be a chance that it's actually not a quote by him, but who cares? He deserves credit. I relied heavily on this book, Ron Chernow's Mark Twain Biography. Again, my boy Ron, such a great storyteller. Last I checked, this book was on sale too. Links in the description. I've also put all other sources I've used for this video in the description. So do some more research. Patrick Mahomes, thank you for staying curious. Mark Twain. And so, henceforth, we shall refer to him as Mark Twain.
We got it.